The House comes to the debate on the Budget Policy Statement 2025 and Half-Year Economic and Fiscal Update 2024.
Rawiri Waititi. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an overwhelming feeling to hear all the speeches in this House and not once mention well-being. The last speaker talked about inheriting a wrecked economy. Well, I wonder how he feels when we've inherited or been subjected to a stolen one. This debate isn't about numbers on spreadsheets. It's about real people, real whānau and real struggles. This is a budget that doesn't care about New Zealanders. It doesn't want to invest in those struggling whānau, working hard, the sick, Māori or PI, because it only wants to serve those who want to exploit our country. There is no well-being indicators in this budget. What we have is a government that doesn't care about the social return on investment, because it only cares for profit or for shareholdings and for international exploitation. This budget tells us nothing. It tells us nothing of the well-being of Aotearoa. Nothing at all. They could fund Māori healthcare, so whānau don't wait months for care of others that get in the days. Or they could close mortality rates, but they don't. And you know what? They continue to talk about equality. Liberal democracy is about equality because it's easier. But equity is what's missing in this country. We're not talking about equity because equity costs. And this budget talks nothing about equity and closing the gaps, closing the mortality rates, lowering Māori prison rates. Māori make up 50% of the prison population for males in prison. We're not looking at how we close those gaps. And that's what equity funding does. That's what this budget should be talking about. But it doesn't. And so they come up with these catchphrases. Woke. All of these woke things. So it's not woke. Follow the data, follow the science, and stop being so stupid. And the politics of distraction. We heard it in one of the speeches, the Americanizing of our country. We have got to stop allowing these types of governments to run their agenda. And Americanizing our country is not the answer to closing inequity. And you continue to use words that Trump uses, woke. Everything you disagree with is woke. Equity is woke. And so what you do is you cut funding. You cut funding to those who are struggling. It's not about productivity, because productivity will be achieved once we have closed the gaps between those who have and those who have not. And the budget doesn't look at any of that. And actually, your last 16 months has absolutely blown equity out of the water. And what you do is you use this race-baiting type politics to get your point across. It's got nothing to do with Pākehā or Māori. It's got everything to do with the economy. But you use those types of tactics to distract us from the real issues. And that's what this budget policy statement doesn't do for our people. And I'll tell you what, we'll have a whole lot of trolls trolling us in the morning when they see this speech. Because in actual fact, what they don't recognise is they're part of the 98% that are getting ripped off as well. And that this government is only tending to the 2% that control 50% of this country's wealth. Removing the Tiriti o Waitangi from any legislation, Treaty Principles Bill, Regulatory Standards Bill, removing Te Tiriti from 28 pieces of legislation, all of that is to allow Aotearoa to be exploited by corporate greed and international investors. And so if you think that's where our economy should be going, and if that is development, or if that is making a profit for this country, we don't want anything for it, and our country needs to wake up. And wake up in 2026 is our chance to make a change. Because these types of policy statements in the haifu does not recognise those who are contributing to it. And that is 98% of the country that are working their butts off to ensure that there is some type of economy here in Aotearoa. And so we must stand up for the 98% of this country whilst this government continues to feed the 2% who control 50% of this country's wealth. And that's what this budget is doing, and that's what this government is doing. It must come to an end. 2026, we will see a change. Kia ora tātou.
The Honourable Julian Genter.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. Kia ora ana, Mr. Speaker. This budget policy statement is the same old tired talking points that I've heard from national governments for way too long. It harks right back to the 1990s, absolutely failed neoliberal concept of what the economy is and how we make progress. And it's sad because I find it frustrating and sad because I'm sure that there are members on the other side of the House who genuinely believe what they're saying. They just don't know better. Like, they confuse excess profit with progress, the rich getting richer with success. And we've known since the 1990s that doesn't work. In the 1990s, inequality dramatically increased in Aotearoa, New Zealand, because of policies from a national government in the early 1990s, and as a result, New Zealand has been held back, and we didn't make the investments in infrastructure that were needed. We haven't invested in public housing. All of these things have contributed to the problems that we face today, and it happened again last time when under the John Key national government, which was less extreme than this one, I'll be honest. It was less extreme. It was less ridiculous and Trump-like. But still, when we hit the GFC and house building completely ceased in the private sector, they didn't put money into state housing, which is what was needed to increase the supply of state housing. Instead, they're like, let's try to create jobs by building some roads. And by roads, I mean 6 highways that were announced in 2009, most of which weren't even procured until the next term of government, and some of which have only recently been completed many years later. And I bring up transport because ultimately, if you really look at the numbers in the government policy statement on land transport and the National Land Transport Program as put out by the NZTA, it becomes abundantly clear that the government's policy on transport will bankrupt the country, and it will come at the expense of investment in things like hospitals, schools, and other vitally important public services. And right now, as we debate this budget policy statement, we've got the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport and the Prime Minister up there at their, the private investment festival, the private capital festival, which is a joke. I mean, they've had to push back this event 3 times. It's a talk fest. There's no reality to it. I believe the Prime Minister actually believes PPPs are free money, that all this foreign capital is just going to come here and build infrastructure in New Zealand for free. No, we have to pay for it. Those investors, my friends, want a return on the money they're putting in. And if they're putting money into roads, which are only going to raise a tiny fraction of their cost from tolls, that means that future New Zealanders will be paying back the debt that is going to be racked up by this government. And that actually is clear in the budget policy statement, because if you look at figure 2 on page 2, you see very clearly that starting in 2008, net core crown debt increased under John Key, slightly started reducing until we hit COVID, and now it's shooting right back up again. And there's no sign of that reducing, because just because you sign up for a PPP doesn't mean you don't have to account for the future repayments to pay it back. And there's a massive gap between forecast revenue from the transport funds and forecast spending once we get outside of this 3-year period. And everybody knows it. It's like the emperor has no clothes. This is ridiculous. It's ridiculous that government parties stand up and give their fiscal discipline talking points, say we can't afford to have decent school lunches for our tamariki, but they can have burned plastic, and a few big corporates can maybe make some money off it. It's abundantly clear that when they talk about doing more with less, they're talking about doing less with less. We're not getting quality school lunches, and a vast majority of New Zealanders can see that. The old program was working. It created local jobs, and it had massive benefits that flow on to the rest of our country, because we are a country, we are a society. And they will blame individual failure for poverty when it's a systemic problem created by policies they promote that do not actually benefit all New Zealanders. They benefit the top 1% and a few big overseas corporates who will be milking it off of the money that we're going to have to pay back in the future. So that's no vision from this coalition government.